All right, family, here is Red Rising. Fuck, what's it called? All right, family, here's Red Rising review part 4 of book 1 of Red Rising. And I want to kind of shift up the way that I do this. When I first thought about making this series, I wanted something that I didn't have with a previous series that I loved. And it's that I wanted a video or someone who I could really connect with who, thought that, super cool, amazing stuff also happened and kind of talk about those intricacies. And I also want to talk about like the underlying philosophies of the book and the cool way the characters connect and how it's reflective of society as a whole. And I've kind of lacked in the sense of, really being with you guys and thinking about all the cool events that happen in the book. So I'm going to try to be better about that from now on and in the future. And I also like how it's a series and how there's multiple parts, and I can really kind of go through and talk about a lot of the book rather than being all in like one video. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start off with a little bit more of the philosophy and get into some of the cool parts that happened. So uh, I believe where I last left off was the beginning of um, yeah, about pretty much the beginning of the Institute. So something I want to again talk about, I think I talked about it last time, but I want to touch on again is the three stages of society that Augustus talks about. He talks about savagery, and then ascendance, and then descendance. No, decadence, sorry. And so you see this in the Institute, right? Where at the beginning it's all savagery, especially in the rage of House Mars. But then, what the proctors want is for there to be ascendance, for there to be civility in the creation of law, when one house dominates all the others and enslaves them. And then there is lastly decadence, where a society crumbles. And you see this in all of society. You see this in Rome, where, you know, they built up this amazing society and then things fell apart. You see it currently in our modern society, and it tailors and it is very much in connection with the thought of, strong men create or weak men create strong times, and strong times create weak weak men. That cycle. So that is where kind of that decadence comes in. The people who created the ascendants are not the same people who are, in offices and leading countries and leading nations during decadence. And the values of the society are not the same. Things have changed. Another point, I mean, this connects all the same. I'm going to have to like kind of re-go through things, but one is that civilization weakens natural selection. And 100% there's weakening of natural selection and through genetics, but also the weakening of the mind and of culture and of kind of strength to that degree. Um, and which is exactly what I'm talking about with this savagery, ascendance, and decadence. And so it is technically it's kind of a cycle of human nature in general. If you look at a person, they're not always 100% on top of things. Like the best of the best, and even myself with certain things that I think I'm good at. It's an ebb and flow. It's like waves. There's troughs and there's peaks. And you can be really good and then kind of fall off the wagon a bit, but then get back on again and keep going. And sometimes they're bigger or smaller, the troughs and peaks. And so it's just a cycle of human nature, and it's reflective in economics, with um, recessions and bull markets, things like that. And so it's inevitably part of human nature, and there's different periods of it. There are the periods in people's individual lives, like I talk about, and then there's longer periods in the economy as a whole, and then there's larger periods in humanity as a whole. Well, before that, it's kind of nations, and then humanity, and then even the universe. And so, to a degree, I'm thinking, well, it's just a part of human nature. Like, it, am I really going to try to, should we try to fix that? Or should we kind of just accept it? Um, and I don't know. And then also, I'm thinking like, is the society's goal not to make the lives of our children easier? Like I think of that Hard times create strong men create easy times create weak men create hard times. I'm thinking of that, but I'm also thinking like, isn't the goal of our society to make the lives of our children easier? Because I look at our society today in the United States, and I look around at my peers, and many of them are very subpar in many ways, physically, mentally, um, and I'm not saying I'm like great or anything. I'm just saying that, and I also didn't grow up in societies before me, but I feel as though um, generations before us were a lot stronger physically, we're a lot more mentally tough, we're a lot smarter in that sense. And certain things have many things have affected this: food, social media, etc., culture. But to a degree, society has very much improved, and the lives of people have gone a lot easier, which has allowed them to become obese. We have so much food, and the food tastes so good, like people are becoming obese, and it's actually detrimenting us. Or the entertainment we have had has gotten so good that people are addicted to it. The movies we watch are so great. Everyone is like getting addicted to scrolling on their phone, and listening to this such great music. Like everything is getting so good. And you would think like that's great. We're advancing as a society. And isn't the purpose of society to be to make the lives of our children better than our lives were? Yes, that's true. But also you have to instill good values and really make sure that your kids understand like the basics and how things came about. That's why I think history is so important. Not only can you see these patterns, but you can see these patterns and really understand it, um, for how ascendance can turn into decadence when people forget how you got to that ascendance in the first place. They forget that savagery is a thing. They think that ascendance is simply the way that life happens, when in reality, it's a construct that was created by humans, by society, to get away from savagery. And sometimes I look out into my daily life and think that I could easily hurt that person. I could easily hurt that girl, and I don't. And it's crazy that, as a society, like the people who came before me were able to build up a world like that where there is law and there is civility, and that I'm not just an animal and a savage in that sense. Um, and that we have language and all of these arts. It's so amazing. And and I don't know the answer. Like, if the goal of society is to make the lives of our children easier, does that serve them? Of course that should be a goal, but it shouldn't be the only goal, and it shouldn't just be that. Like, it's not just to make their lives easier. We also want to make them strong and caring and understanding of all this. The question is just how, and to which I don't have an answer. Um, and I don't even know where to start. These are just things I'm thinking of about the book, in terms of a philosophy sense. And I think that's such an interesting question. That, in fact, should be very much a topic of many classes in college today. But from what I've seen, I haven't seen that. And then you have the point of civilization weakens natural selection on a very much a genetics point, yes, and also a mind and culture point. I was talking with one of my friends today about the phases of, you know, gene editing or eugenics or whatever. First, you have kind of that. I'll go very quickly to just give an overview, not go into anything. Let's get back to the book. But, um, there's kind of five stages where people draw their lines. There's completely natural um, births and egg formation, so pretty much just like sex. Then there's, in vitro fertilization, where the doctor will kind of look and see which eggs, I mean, which, what are they called? Embryos look the most circular, and they'll implant that one. So that's kind of a type of eugenics. You're choosing one based on how it looks. It's not completely random as nature kind of intended. Well, I guess nature didn't intend it to be random because, you know, eggs are supposed to be strong and the sperm that gets there is supposed to be strong and the fastest, but whatever. And now there's companies who are doing analyses on people's embryos to determine which traits are higher than others, which can be great in some senses, but again, it's departing from nature. And then there's the ability to create a child from any possible combination of yourself and your partner. So, like, you could, out of all the kids that you and your partner could make, you could make them the most intelligent, the tallest, etc. That's kind of the third line. The fourth line is giving your child the genetics of any possible human being. So, me, if my wife was white, I could have a black child who's 6'7" and very smart and can run way more than I and my wife could create. That's the fourth level. And then the fifth level is basically genetically modified humans, where you give humans the traits of like a whale so that they grow super big, or give them camouflage, or the fact that they can survive just on water, or some weird stuff. But those are kind of the five lines of kind of human genetics and evolution in our modern sense. And I was talking about like going to space is going to be so crazy with how that affects our genetics and how that speeds up natural selection and evolution, and how we could tweak with our genes or other things like that to survive in space, which is actually connected to the book. It was cool to see how actually that doesn't happen in this book. I'll revert from saying that. Um, so yeah, it is very much true that civilization weakens natural selection, because we care after those who couldn't really care after themselves, and it's just a question of what you do. And I think the bigger question is the one I already brought up, which is how do you not go through that cycle of strong men, strong and weak times, and how you don't fall into decadence, because you make the next generations still strong, still caring, still understanding, and so they're able to carry forward. Next, I want to talk about the fact of Darrow and the amount of growth that he's gone through at the Institute and all the other students. You see these Peerless Guard, and I guess we don't know much about that at this point in the book, but we know that they've gone through the Institute and we know what the Institute looks like. But how could Darrow have grown as much as he did without the Institute, without all of the horrors that happened and all the lessons that only those deathly hard and terrible times could teach him? He couldn't have. If he had just stayed with EO and lived his life, he wouldn't have become the person that he becomes in the Institute and after the Institute and way beyond the Institute. He wouldn't have learned what he learned about human nature, about savagery and ascendance and decadence. Um, and he had to go through those horrors. Everyone in the Institute has killed someone. Everyone has that guilt on their back. They know what it feels like to kill, and that's very much something that you need in a leader. Like, he goes through all these super transformational things that he would not have gotten otherwise in his regular normal life had Io not killed herself. And so that's reflective on our own lives. I'm also, and it goes back to what I just said before about the hard times, good times, and like the natural selection. It's that people need to go through hard times sometimes. You know, the worst thing that happens to someone is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. So it doesn't matter if it was someone stepping on their toe or if it was them getting shot 4 times and everyone else in their family dying. That's the worst thing that's happened to them. And so, it sucks to say, but, or it sucks that it's kind of the reality. But if people, like your children or whatever, if you forcefully make bad things happen to them, it shifts their perspective in a way that will suit them in the future. But that's also so hard to do to your child, to do something purposely bad to them or that will, hurt them in some sort of way. And so it's trying to kind of understand this this reality of that, bad things need to happen for good things to follow and for you to grow and transition um, in any sort of way. And another thing on that point, that'll be the end of that point. Another thing is that growing up is simply realizing that adults are just grown up children. And many people have, thought of this way before me, but it's just no matter who, it always occurs to people as they grow up. And it's a very revolutionary kind of experience. Because as a child, you look up at your mom and your dad and they're superheroes, no one is better than them. And even you look up at other adults and you think that they know everything. Like they have everything figured out. They tell me what to do, etc. But then you grow up and you get older and you realize that they're just grown up like you. They have no clue what they're doing. They're kind of just going about things with what they've learned and they don't have, everything figured out. And that's kind of the what's so great and so bad about life is that it's unpredictable and that there is no certain path. You get to kind of create your own path. And that's very freeing, but it's also very daunting in the fact that you, it's all self generalized. The entire time when you were a child, you were given things and you were shown the way in school, from your parents. And then all of a sudden you're there and you have to decide what you're going to do with your time, what you're going to do on this life. And it's a whole different paradigm shift. And that's really where you kind of become an adult. And you realize that everyone else is just in the same boat and has the same thoughts and uncertainty as you do. That's a very interesting thing. And Darrow goes through that at the Institute and after the Institute, where he's kind of like, shit, I thought people had this big plan when really they're just trying to do as best as they can. Next thing I want to talk about, I noticed this while rereading Red Rising. Um, there's a point where Sevro, so I thought a funny part was Sevro saving Cassius and Darrow from the launch, from the water. Like Mustang and Pax had them trapped in the, like, swimming in the little lake or whatever. And then it goes on. They're about to get hypothermia. They're about to drown. Darrow thinks he's going to die. And then Severo, like, comes in and knives a couple of the guys that are watching over them and saves Darrow and Cassius. And that was so funny. And Severo is such a funny character. But um, Severo's talking to Darrow once, and he's saying how Darrow is a lot like Severo. Like Darrow, I'm pretty sure Darrow asks Severo why he would save us. And Severo says that Darrow is a lot like him. Yet at the same time, he's a lot like Cassius. And I thought that was so interesting. Um, how Darrow is a lot like Severo, but can also be a lot like Cassius. Because Darrow was the 100th, I mean, Darrow was the first pick for Mars. Severo was the 100th pick. Like, which means they are both outsiders. Which, although that is very much different, they are similar in that sense that they are outsiders. Um, but the thing is, they're both just playing different games, which is very interesting. And it was something that I picked up after only rereading the book, which was very interesting. That they are probably more similar than they are different, even though there's that 99% gap between them. And it also made me reflect on like kind of being an outsider in my own life, um, and being in the group. Throughout my whole life in school, and like elementary school and middle school, I've been very athletic all my life. I've usually been part of the athletic group, part of the popular group at certain points, in middle school, high school, elementary school, mostly in that like upper area of popularity. But there's also been many times, especially moving into middle school and high school, where I've maybe been in some of those groups, but felt like an outsider and felt like I didn't belong or didn't want to be in those groups. Um, I don't know, I sort of understand that on a personal level. And even now, I want to, of course, I want to be friends with like great people, but I also want my own space. I know how to be extroverted, and maybe I was extroverted in my childhood, but I feel like I'm an introvert at heart. Um, I like myself, small, intimate groups of people, one-on-one, small groups, but I can also be very extroverted. Like I just went on a trip to Florida for my internship, and all of the students in my group that I'll be interning with, there was only a group of like 6 or 7, they were saying that uh, you know, I'm a very extroverted person, and it's because it's a skill. It's something that I can pull out when needed, and it's especially needed at one of those like type of networking events. And so I would say that I only get energy from those closest to me. I do probably get energy from others as well, but I very much need my own time. And so in that way, I sort of feel kind of in group and and an outsider, which is exactly what Darrow is at this point. He is, like Cassius, as Sevro said, he's one of the top people in the house. He is very tall. He is very handsome, looks very good, seems to be like quote unquote popular. Um, but he's also very much an outsider. And Severo has noticed this from Darrow's actions, but it goes beyond that because Severo obviously doesn't know that Darrow is a red. Darrow is truly an outsider. And it was a very um, interesting point for me to see. And next, I have two great things that happen. One of them was when Darrow and Cassius and Severo take um, House Diana. So as Mustang has gone to, after they get out of the water, Severo saves them. Mustang goes to take Mars's castle, and Severo, Cassius, and Darrow take the kind of clothing of the people that Severo like knived, and they go to Minerva, Castle Minerva. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, and basically walk through the gates because the person kind of just lets them in when Severo says the correct password, and then Severo goes and retrieves their I forget what it's called, but their staff. And then Darrow goes upstairs, looks at the map, and figures out some other places that he didn't know about, and then writes Mars into everything, breaks everything, realizes that Minerva, that castle is a civil castle, whereas Mars is basically completely in savagery. So Darrow's like, oh, I'm gonna turn Minerva, give him a little taste of something they don't have, give him that savagery, and Cassius just starts lighting things on fire. Darrow like shoves someone through the window as they fall, starts shouting that, all of House Mars is in Minerva and freaking everyone out when there's just 3 of them and they just walk away with Minerva's standard. That's what it is. Um, with the 3 of them having burnt the entire place and freaking out everyone, which I thought was just a hilarious scene. Um, and then is the next chapter, which I've gone to um, rereading it and making these videos is when Darrow finds out that Titus is actually red, which is a crazy part. When I'm rereading this and making notes for when I talk about these videos, I have to remember that I already know all this stuff, and so I need to remember the reaction that I had the first time I read it. And the reaction of figuring out that Titus was actually red is so crazy. It's like, no way. That explains so much about how Titus has been acting, how he doesn't really care about killing all the golds or them dying, how he's feeding off of it. He wants to kill them. He's raping all the gold girls. And so it just explains a lot about his behavior and the um and the conversations that, or the conversation that Darrow has with Titus in the cell, and it's very showing. Um, and what Titus does for Darrow is teach him what not to become. Darrow realizes that Titus is no different than him. Titus has just chosen to go down a different path and lost sight of the dream. Titus didn't have Eo's dream to look after. Darrow knows that the only reason his wife died was because she wanted this dream, and Darrow was trying to make that dream come true. Titus didn't have that. Titus's wife was unfortunately, um, raped, and just even thinking about that is just so terrible. I try to think about that on a personal level, and that's got to be absolutely world bending, world destroying. No wonder Titus goes and does everything he does. Like Darrow says, he probably would have been in the exact same boat if he gone through what Titus has gone through and didn't have Eo and Eo's dream. And so that was a crazy moment. And I would linger on those lines where Titus says like, well, that's what they did to her, and realizing that Titus is a red and that he was only reciprocating what had been done to him and getting that revenge. Um, and so that was crazy to read for the first time, and even rereading it and just thinking about the entire situation as a whole. But that will be the end of my part 4 review. I hope you guys really enjoyed this one. I'm gonna try to be better about explaining some really cool things that happen in the book because I think it is so awesome. I wish for this to be something that, I can look back on, but also something that others can enjoy. Not only enjoy, but take away some cool insights from as well. That's why I talk about the philosophy stuff, and the human nature stuff. And so I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope I can get better at making these, especially as the books go on, because I will tell you this series is so absolutely amazing. Whether you're currently in the middle of reading it or you have already read it, I love it so much. I'm getting towards the end of the third book right now, personally reading, and I cannot wait to get into the fourth, fifth, sixth, and even seventh and see what that is about because I've heard it's very good. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.